podcast three. Here we go. We turn this off. Okay. Welcome to Brother Won't You Talk to Me, a podcast about growing up in the 60s, social change, and what it meant from two perspectives almost 10 years apart. I want to introduce myself. I'm Lee Rennick, a webinar host, podcast, woman tour, mom, among other things, and actually Baba. And I'd love to introduce my brother, Rob Rennick, learner, teacher extraordinaire, amazing brother. Rob, welcome to the show once again.
It's great to be back. Yeah, in the winter here, and it's a lot of good stories to tell.
And we've kind of taken a little bit of a break. We both got really busy. We did a few recordings, podcast one and two, and then we took a bit of a break, but we're recording right before the holiday season, right before Christmas if you celebrate it, or Hanukkah. So, a really nice time. Just want to remind our viewers that obviously our opinions expressed today in the program are those of us, the speakers, and we really created this podcast and webcast to share it with our family and friends about our perspectives, of growing up in the 60s. So, all right. So I named this podcast, Oh Canada,
Yeah.
Blue Jeans, Cruising Towards 1966 and Beyond. And
Ooh.
something that sort of reminds me of my childhood. Just watch me read a little red book. So that's the title of this one. Rob, we left off last podcast talking about the warmth of the sun, our early memories of our times that, as Dylan probably said, were changing.
Yeah.
And they were changing really at a rapid pace. So, any thoughts since our last conversation?
Well, I think 1965, 66 is kind of a momentum of change in Canada, and it sets up for the centennial year. And so I'm thinking about that kind of like speed up of, I guess, cultural activities towards that time period and changes, rapid changes in society. So I think all those things are kind of moving quickly and kind of forming a new kind of sense of Canada and ourselves as boomers.
Yeah, yeah, as Canadian boomers and like
Yeah,
growing up. And we talked on our last podcast, we talked about, the early 60s. I mean, I was still pretty much very small, a baby, but there was a huge transition in the world that you experienced. I mean, sadly, we had President Kennedy's assassination in the US, which was a very sad time. I remember, even mom I
of
remember the
course. Yeah.
sadness in our household. One of my favorites, the Beatles coming to America. So this sort of,
Yeah.
UK culture coming in our household, women being, I think, being a bit more independent. And at school, you had mentioned kids having transistor radios and some new
Yeah.
ways of maybe dancing. So, really amazing years. Any additional thoughts sort of on, those initial years of the 60s?
I think again it was a transformative age coming out of the war, and moving forward to a new kind of sense of Canada. We were building up to 20 million, and
Oh,
that was also a big change. We had immigration coming in as well to make Canada kind of more diverse. And it was kind of like a switch from a certain type of 50s mentality to the 60s.
yeah. And it was like a huge shift, wasn't it?
I
Really?
think so. Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Because you were born in 1951 and you kind of experienced that whole 50s
Mhm.
thing, which we kind of look very fondly at, even some of the singing, all of this stuff, but it really was a huge, huge transition. All right, so let's talk about 1965 and 66. You are like 14, 15 years old. You're probably at the end of public school or starting high school. Um, what were some of the things you were seeing in your life that were changing? I know you started to grow out your hair.
Well, 14, 15, sort of,
Yeah.
a little
Um,
bit.
you went to Yorkville, I think you maybe started, maybe not. Maybe
Yeah,
Yorkville was just starting
yeah,
as sort of a hippie location.
yeah.
And I think maybe what I viewed as a little kid being 5 or 6 years old was all of a sudden you became more of an independent family member and brother. So, yeah, what were some of the things you were experiencing?
Yeah, as a teen, 14, 15, there was a sort of an independence kind of idea there. And we were just kind of exploring that in Toronto. One of the major things in Toronto is we had a north-south subway, but
Mhm.
there was a completion of the new subway, east and west, in 1965, 66. So that allowed, I guess, young teenagers to go right downtown in a quick manner because before that time, you had to go on a bus and it took, I don't know, 34 stops or something to find Toronto. So there was sort of an independence in a kind of way in regards to transportation, public transportation in Toronto. And for people that were turning into their teens, later teens, you could, explore Toronto in a more individual way. So that was a kind of thing I think that we kind of felt was there. Again, we talked about the warmth of coming, into this time period. And again, it's the 60th anniversary of the Canadian flag, the maple leaf.
That's right.
And
Yes.
so that was a prominent thing at our school because, before we left the school on summer holidays, there was a new Canadian flag going up the flagpole. And it was this new kind of idea of new transitions to what it was to be a Canadian under this flag, right? And there was this kind of momentum towards, I guess, the centennial year as well with that. And so I think there was this kind of new kind of idea that there was something new in the air that was going to kind of produce this new kind of electric kind of change with that. Um, I also remember it as a kind of very buoyant time in regards to like jobs because I think for the first time there was a huge amount of job creation in Canada or even in Ontario, Toronto. There was a multitude of people getting those jobs with good wages, and they were able to kind of then buy things
Yeah.
in an extraordinary time period. This is a time of, buying a station wagon, and we had
Yeah.
a station wagon, and traveled around. And, for people who are in unions, they could have a station wagon, they have a car, they could buy a cottage, they could go to movies, they could do a whole bunch of things. And
Yeah.
in the community, there was I think in Toronto, I saw that change compared to my grandparents' change where it was very difficult to buy a car.
Yeah.
Now there was this great option to travel individually, and at 16, you could get your driver's license, and many of the teens did. So that was in
Yeah.
it too.
Yeah. And didn't we took our train trip out west with our family, right? On which was a huge, big,
And,
extravagant thing
and
to
I
do,
think
really.
as the 60s progressed into, from 65 to 70, I think the big thing was about travel. Like there was
Yeah.
this great impetus that you were not just staying in your local town, which many Canadians did. You
Yeah.
could explore, and many, I think even our relatives, bought a station wagon, they traveled.
Yeah.
We were very lucky because our father let us travel on one of the iconic railway trips was on the Canadian, the now Via
Yeah.
Rail across to Calgary and up to Edmonton, and then we rented a car and went up through the down, I guess, the Rocky Mountains back to Calgary to see the Calgary Stampede.
Yeah.
So there was this kind of idea, I think, of this, idea of exploring Canada,
Yeah.
finding about its history, looking at like traditional crafts of Canada, barns of Canada,
Yeah.
uh, paintings of Canada. There was this new kind of thing
Yeah.
as we went through the centennial year. So I think as a 14 and 15-year-old, there was that kind of a little bit of that excitement there. And also this idea of modern stuff. We had a modern Canadian flag, that was very, very modern
Yeah.
looking. And then, of course, the City Hall opened up in 65, and it was like a spaceship there.
Well, yeah, exactly. I know. And we're going to talk about that. That was huge, huge, huge transformation of our architectural visual landscape of our city, right?
Yeah. It
Okay.
was it. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
So no,
I'll
so
let you
well,
talk. I was excited.
I, yeah, and for me, I guess when I think about it now that we're talking about it, you were like 14, 15, but I was like 5, 6 years old. So for me, it was kind of my first sense of consciousness was around these very visual sort of things, like you know, kids growing out like your age group and a bit older growing out their hair and like different kinds of music compared to what, we sort of the new music and the new type of architecture. And yeah, maybe getting on a streetcar or a subway or something was, as a little kid, was sort of a really big, made the world feel very big and very sort of full of possibility as a little child, you know?
I think that's true. It was like this possible time in the from 65, 66.
Yeah.
All those things kind to sort of came to fruition in especially Toronto, um, which was kind of growing and kind of developing its transportation system.
Yeah.
Yeah, developing its neighborhoods. So,
Well, yeah, that's interesting. Well, speaking of neighborhoods and kind of homes, we lived in sort of a rural area, Highland Creek, but I made a list of things. I'm going to repeat these in no regular,
yeah,
like I'll just list them off, but of things I saw as a little kid during that time that kind of maybe you were connected to or you brought into the house and it kind of impacted on how I viewed the world. So the Quiet Revolution in Quebec taking off. Robert Charlebois, I remember his record coming into our house from you. Maybe you were a bit older, the March of the La Marche du
yeah.
Président,
I
1965. I do remember you walking around with Mal's little red book,
think
which
that
is
was later, but yeah, the
it was
Cultural
later maybe,
Revolution.
but they were
Yeah,
first published in 64. So maybe there was a
yeah,
way you can explain how you were introduced to this sort of revolutionary culture, potentially, like the culture you were introduced to. Blue jeans, again, you were older, but you did we'll talk about it maybe
yeah,
another time, but you did get thrown out of school because you wore
did,
blue
yeah.
jeans. And then hair, you started getting your groovy sort of hair. Um, I think maybe we became more aware of the drugs, psychedelic culture, and then of course the music art, Yorkville, and the changing face of Toronto, which we've been talking about. So maybe can you talk a little bit about, now that I've listed them out, can you talk a little bit about how you were introduced to different types of culture, cultural change that maybe, yes, we had this brand new Canadian flag, but we had this quiet revolution going on in Quebec. What did that mean to you? And then maybe, how did it connect you to your feelings about Canada, about our culture and sort of the changing culture you were living in?
Yeah, again, I think travel was a big component, and it could be travel physically or travel through music or film. So, we went also skiing and traveling
Yeah,
around. I don't know, it was a little bit later. We went to Montreal, Quebec City, and it was a different kind of space there, and there was a lot of different kinds of visual things that were different, and music in Quebec that we had never heard before. So I think that was another part of this idea of kind of going out from your hometown to explore those things. But um, the thing I think about Toronto with neighborhoods is that. As soon as that line went into the east-west line in Bloor,
yeah,
then it became a kind of possibility to say, well, I'd like to travel to High Park, or I like to
yeah,
travel here or there. Or I would like to travel to Bay and get off the station there and go to Yorkville.
yeah, yeah,
And so Yorkville was sort of, I think, a challenging neighborhood for Toronto.
yes,
And there was lots in the media, especially in the papers, the Globe and the Star, about this community, which was not very big. It was like 3 or 4 blocks
yeah,
up and down north of Bloor Street that became kind of a center for, I guess, teenagers who were older than I, and even maybe in their 20s, kind of looking at, possibilities other than their parents. And I would say, it was about a counterculture because a lot of the older teenagers were sort of disappointed in their parents and the kind of problems that looked at, in the future. One of them was, of course, this atomic nightmare that could
yeah,
come down. There were lots of material goods there, but how close were their communities and how close were their parents to them as emotional supports?
yeah,
There was this kind of idea of this new music, and I think also sexuality and who you
yeah,
were could be explored, and this idea of, as a woman or as a man, what does that mean now with birth control and all that? So it became kind of a place for I would say disenchanted huge groups of youth to kind of congregate and basically just talk at these coffee shops, which
yeah,
was unusual for Toronto because when you had old bars in Toronto,
yeah,
you went into a dark room with tables. The windows were very, very small. You weren't supposed to look out. You were supposed to eat, have this
yeah,
very contained kind of dinners or have cocktails. But on the streets of Yorkville there was no like containment. things spilled onto the streets, whether it was music or the rockers, or I would say the mods. I mean, there were a lot of mod women in Toronto that had very short skirts and very long, hair, and wore this very sort of modern clothing without any decor. And then there were the rockers who had the women and men had both long hair. You couldn't tell them apart really, and you had this kind of more jean leather jacket looks. And so that was sort of unusual. And there was lots of, I think, politicians who were upset about it. They wanted to hide it away.
Yeah.
They wanted to stop the cars going up and down these two roads in Yorkville, and tried to kind of shut it down in a kind of way. There was lots of instances of that as it went into 66. So, um, and the music there kind of spilled out of the cafes. There were a whole bunch
Yeah.
of different cafes there. Some were folk cafes,
Yeah.
some more blues and rock, if you call it that. Because, Dylan, of course, had electrified his
Yeah.
music in
Yes.
65.
Yeah.
And so, well, now what was going to happen, right? That started, in Yorkville, even some of the, cafes started to have electric music. So um, there was a strange kind of neighborhood there that was, people talked about in New York or Chicago. Oh, yeah, there's this Yorkville. But if you were an older culture, you would say, oh, look at those dirty, like,
Yeah.
kids. What
Yes.
they're smoking there could be drugs there. There's, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so there was this kind of, I guess, separation a little bit between that generation from the 50s or from the when it came out of the 30s or something, and now this new generation. Yeah.
I mean,
That was
I remember going down sort of as a family, walking around Yorkville. Our sister worked at the Riverboat Cafe in future years in the 60s, or I think in the late 60s. She met all those folk artists, but
yeah, she did.
it kind of seemed, yeah, like sort of like being transported to a different, like when you watch a sci-fi movie from the 60s, it was like you got transported into this different place. For me, as a little kid, it felt like very visual and very like free. I had this sense of freedom, even though maybe that wasn't really there. When I walked around there with you guys, or we'd walk around, it felt like sort of free and like anything could happen. There was like no real constraint around how you had to be. So as a little one, that's what it felt like for me.
I think that was true in Toronto. It was like this new kind of thing that people wanted to see, and they were sometimes bemused by it. Some of them sometimes they were very upset about the sort of ethical changes, moral standards.
Yeah,
And then there was this kind of exploration that was going to come from the poets, the writers,
yeah,
the novelists, Margaret Atwood, or
yeah.
Neil Young. Uh,
The band were the guys that took Dylan Electric. So I mean, they
yeah, the Hawks. I mean, all that stuff was
yeah,
sort of all sort of fermenting there, and the
yeah,
spillovers from the street. So
yeah,
that was kind of a very exciting time, I think, for myself. Even though I was very young, you could, when you went to the place, or when you read about it in the papers, it was this new kind of imaginative thing that
yeah.
was going to somehow change us, right?
Yeah, yeah, it was amazing. So, and we talked a little bit about music, but is that sort of, did you find that you also then started listening to different types of music? Like, what were your influences? Like, I remember you bringing always like a lot of albums at home or buying them or whatever, but was there anything in particular that, really changed the way you were listening to music and bands you were thinking about listening to?
I think the electric, yeah, guitar change in music was the major change for me, that I wanted to buy more records that had, a lot of
Yeah,
solo electric guitar music in it. And that was kind of a kind of thing there. And it was, you talk about Jimi Hendrix and, his guitar or whatever,
yeah,
or other, players from that period. It was kind of like an extraordinary instrument, in the t times, when they had, in Venice, when there was different players who played violin, they said they played like the devil. For many older people, electric
yes,
guitars was this kind of devilish, kind of impish music, right? That could
yeah.
sway people in certain types of ways. So Yeah, I started to look at for records down at Sam's A&A's and all those things for down places down there, Dundas and Young, to try to find those yeah
Yeah, and I
those
mean, I remember like you and Kent and our brother, like, he was a little bit younger, but bringing in like, I don't know, like maybe this is later on, like John Mayall and like these blues bands and all of this
yeah
music, and like then Hendrix coming in. All it just seems like this was just the formation of like when music was really transforming, like you say, because everybody went electric, right? Most people did,
yeah
and yeah, it was really, really like as a little ch kid too. Again, like reflecting on it, I love music, and I love to sing, and I've played in bands, and I write music, and it's like one of the reasons I love that is because it was so prevalent. The record player was so prevalent in the
yeah.
household as being the place. Like you would go into the back room in our house, stick a record on, and we would listen to it. And mom and dad would join in, right? And probably it was John Mayall, and that's probably what I'm thinking of. So yeah, kind of an interesting time.
I think you could say that. Yeah, the record player, the hi-fi system, that was a place to kind of yeah to kind of go around,
Yeah,
around as a communal kind of act
yeah,
and listen to music and later on it could be privatized. You could have your own record player in your own room, listen to
yeah,
your own records. So it became kind of as you said, a transformative kind of act, going from one space to another. We started to go into like an oral society where space wasn't made by visual means, but by sound. So
yes,
that
yeah.
was a huge kind of idea that the later on Marshall McLuhan picked up on, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, yeah, yeah.
That's
Mm,
very cool. Okay, so let's hit back. We talked a little bit about Toronto. So yeah, City Hall was being designed, and we were talking about you commuting and taking this
yeah.
subway line, the east-west into Toronto, being able to get off at Bay. But 65 in September, our Toronto City Hall was designed by Finnish architect Veo Ravel. It was a very controversial design, I think. I mean, it's very beautiful too. But do you think maybe like tr that design in a way modernized Toronto a bit, put us on the map as being more of an international city? I mean, I love the Mies van der Rohe buildings at the TD centers that, he was the first high rise we had that came soon after. So like, what are your thoughts around just the architectural aspect of this for Toronto as well too?
Well, Toronto was a very, I think, stodgy Victorian city up until that point. There were a
Yeah,
few skyscrapers, Imperial Bank down at King that were created in sort of Art Deco kind of style. But
yeah,
most of the other buildings were very kind of stodgy looking and whatever. And this kind of, the mod look of sleekness and this kind of idea of, space, and spacemen and all this, which was, the first, I think, spacewalk. I forget, it was a Russian,
yeah,
Alexandra Leonov or something, happened in 66, right? So there was this whole kind of attitude about like it kind of being, uh, I don't know, a kind of way to, instead of getting away from these rooms which had clutter, to have this new kind of movement. And maybe it would be also a movement of your mind.
yeah,
And so it was like a radical departure. And
very.
I've heard some people, look, parents who were from that other side said, it looks like a urinal. I wouldn't go there,
Oh,
right? Things like
interesting.
that. Like there was such disgust from some older people that said that, it was like a urinal,
Yeah,
because there was a
interesting.
curving thing with the thing in the center.
Wow.
Um, so it was really also, divisive in some ways in Toronto, because some people really thought it was this new kind of future thing. And the other thing was that Archer, the uh, sculpture there
Yeah.
was by the famous British artist, the sculptor, what's his name? At
Uh,
the
oh my gosh, Murray McLaughlin sings about
No,
him in one of his
no,
songs.
I'll have to get back to it.
Yeah.
But that was,
Henry Moore. Henry
Henry
Moore.
Moore's sculpture,
Yeah.
yeah. And that sculpture caused a huge protest because it was going to be bought by the city. And then people said, this is disgusting. I don't know what it looks like. It looks like a kind of eraser, rubber eraser.
Yeah.
Someone used. And so Phil Givens got together with other, I guess, patrons, and they raised money themselves to buy it,
Wow.
to to put it in the center of the square.
Wow.
So you could see
Wow.
the, abrasiveness between different groups in regards to this new kind of modern Toronto. But it
Yeah.
did put us on the map, and people,
Yeah.
even though the architect died before it was really completed, it really made Toronto look very different from its past and kind of gave a direction maybe towards its future.
Well, that's an interesting way to kind of segue into sort of the end of this podcast. But reflecting on it, our city and our home, like life was modernizing dramatically. And it was changing sort of all at the same time at home and also within our environment, with our city.
Yeah.
In 1965, and I'm really excited because I'm seeing this band on May 30th in Toronto. So in 1965 in Canada, the number one hit was a song by the Guess Who called Shaken All Over.
Yeah.
So, question for you, Rob. Do you think we were kind of shaken all over?
Well, I think you could sum it up like 1965 was shaken all over. I mean, we were going into that new stage of Canada where things were tossed upside down, were spun around. We were excited by it. We were kind of, almost inebriated by this new kind of feeling of change, I would say, right? And so shaking all over, right? I think it's a good kind of metaphor for the
Yeah,
time. Yeah.
I think so too. And that wraps up this podcast, podcast three now, and it segues well into our next one, which is after we're shaking all over, are you experienced? Are you really experienced? And we're going to talk in our next podcast, which I can't wait for, about rock shows, chickens, bagism, peace, and burning guitars. So I can't wait.
Yeah,
I can't wait to do that
that's going
one.
to be fun.
Thank you so much, Rob. As always, these talks are so insightful. I love you so much as a brother. You're amazing. Thank you for
Love you,
sharing
sister.
all of
It's great we're
your
doing this, talking about, yeah,
thanks you for sharing all these experiences with me. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it too.
Hey everyone. Thanks for listening to and watching Brother Won't You Talk to Me. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe.